A memoir by Robert Hogue, Chapter 19, Game On. For my first official game, Frank signed me up to be the lead bowler in a team of 4. That might sound scary, but it's not. The lead bowler is just the bowler who goes first. The fourth bowler, called the skip, is the one who's actually in charge. Pretty much everyone starts out playing in 4s, and being the lead bowler is a nice, gentle way to begin. My job was simple. All I had to do was draw 2 bowls as close to the jack as possible. The opposing teams would alternate as the lead, second, third, and fourth bowlers all took their turn. The skip stayed at the other end and barked orders to his 3 teammates before they bowled. No matter what he said, no matter what kind of crazy, impossible to pull off shot he told you to play, the only acceptable response was to yell back, "Yes, Skip!" like you were in an army taking orders. I'm sure there were a few club members still dubious about a skinny disabled kid playing, but the first bowl I sent down the day gently nudged the jack. "Good bowl!" Frank cheered. The second stopped on the line about a foot behind it. Further down the bowling order, things got a bit more complicated. By the time the skip started bowling, there were already 12 bowls on the green. Sometimes they had to draw their last bowl around an opponent's bowl. Sometimes they'd have to put a bit of force behind their bowl to push one of their team's bowls closer to the jack, or knock the opposition's bowl out of the way. Sometimes they had to shoot the bowl as fast as they could at the target. This shot was called the drive. There was a little finesse to it. It was pure, brute force. And truth be known, it failed as often as it succeeded. Frank refused to teach me to drive. He thought it was overused, a tool for players who couldn't draw properly. I'd have plenty of time to learn it down the track, he said. In mid-afternoon, a bell rang and we stopped for a break. Men in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s all took off their hats and headed inside, and so did I. We ate cucumber sandwiches and drank cups of tea. It was hot, but I drank that tea and ate those sandwiches like I had magically aged and turned into my father. My team was ahead, but only just. The game could go either way. We turned to the green 15 minutes later. The rest of the afternoon was an up-and-down affair. Our opponents caught up to us and then pulled slightly ahead, but we fought back. Going into the final round, the scores were level. I stepped up to the green and drew my first bowl. It stopped right in line with the jack, 2 or 3 inches in front of it. I watched as the opposing team's lead bowl rolled down the green. It was getting closer to mine. Just as I thought it was going to fall short, it nudged my bowl and ended up just in front. My next delivery was the last one I'd make in my first proper game. It had to be a good one. I planted my foot and the metal stand down firmly to make sure I was stable, and focused on exactly where I wanted the ball to end up. Then I let it go. At first I thought the bowl was going too fast, too far, but it crept out wide and gently swung back in. It edged its way around my first bowl and the other team's bowl until it nudged the jack. Frank gave me a loud clap and I smiled. We stayed ahead for the rest of the game and my team won. I headed home a happy sportsman. I graduated from playing 4s to triples and then to pairs. Pairs was my favorite because it meant getting to bowl your first 2 bowls, swap with the skip while they bowled 2 of theirs, and then come back and bowl another 2 of yours. I enjoyed playing pairs with Frank most of all. He was a good player, not a champion since his aim was going off a bit in his old age, but we'd have great fun. He'd offer good suggestions and encourage me to take some risks. They didn't always pay off, but it was fun trying. And Frank was the perfect coach, weighing up the odds, asking if I fancied my chances and telling me to go for it. We probably lost more matches than we should have, but Frank saw them as an opportunity to learn, to stretch my arm. I found my sporting home, on a team, and not playing any of the sports I originally thought I would. Once again, my disability had restricted my choices, but then driven me to new ones that seemed so much better than anything else could have been. Soon after, the Queensland Lawn Bowls Association chose to officially allow junior members. This meant we could be formally recognized by the clubs, play in inter-club pennant matches, and compete in regional and statewide competitions. I was quick to register, and Mom and I even went off into town for the first meeting to elect representatives and office bearers. The first major singles competition I played was a round-robin event on the first day, with playoffs on the second. Frank came with me, and we settled in for what I decided was going to be a winning day. I cruised an easy victory in my first match, and my second match looked just as simple. My opponent was a few years younger than me, smaller, and looked like he'd only been playing a year or 2 at most. A pushover, I thought. Except the kid was good. I lost the first round 4-0, the worst result possible. My opponent would draw a bowl within half an inch of the jack every time. Or if I drew shot, he'd give my bowl a nudge, knock it back 3 feet or so, and claim the round. Time after time, he kept taking the shot or denying me whenever I came close. We broke for lunch in the middle of the game, and I sat down and chatted with Frank. "Robert," he said, "I think it's time we taught you how to drive." I shrugged, doubting that it would have made much difference that day anyway. I went back out there, rested, focused, and determined to redouble my efforts, and got resoundingly beaten. Luckily, I won my third match and progressed to the finals that next day. I made it through the morning, but I was beaten in the semis and ended up in third place. But I got a trophy, the first I'd ever received for a genuine sporting achievement. The next Saturday morning, I turned up for coaching, and Frank had organized the club's driving expert to come down and teach me. He was a tall, fierce man and would drive his bowl down to the other end of the green so fast that when it connected with another ball, it sounded like it was splitting an atom. It was a good lesson, but I wasn't the best driver because I delivered the ball stationary. A lot of the best drivers walked into it, but I was stuck standing on the mat. In any case, I was happy with the skills Frank had taught me, happy he'd brought me into the competition, made me part of a team, showed me that it could sometimes be just as much fun losing as winning. So long as I was in a team, preferably his team. Most people have a favorite sporting coach, a favorite teammate, and a favorite grandfather. Frank was all of those things to me. I'd wanted so desperately to be part of a team. I'd wanted to be cheered when I got something right and jeered when I didn't. I wanted to win, and when I didn't, I wanted to lose with friends by my side. Lawn bowls gave me all that and more. Chapter 20, Growing Up Slow. Nowhere ever will you find a worse example of humanity than grade 9 boys. That included me. At some stage that year, a bunch of us decided that filling our mouths up with water at a drinking fountain and spitting it at our classmates was the coolest way we could spend our time. Extra points were awarded if you could squirt water over someone's shirt just before class resumed, so they'd have to sit there soaking wet, looking stupid. At first, we'd try to act casual, as if our mouths weren't full of water, but it was pretty hard convincing someone you weren't going to squirt water on them when you couldn't talk. Soon people began running after each other to deliver a mouthful. I was neither fast enough to run after people nor fast enough to escape when they came up after me, so I got drenched. I sat with Robert F. one lunchtime just before class resumed, soaked in water. "This is an issue that must be addressed," I said. "What are you going to do?" Robert F. asked. "I've got an idea," I told him. I spied an empty shampoo bottle of Mom's in the bathroom a few days earlier. It was long and slender and small enough to fit in my pocket. I rinsed it out, brought it to school, and filled it with water. While I still didn't have the speed of the other kids, my weapon had significantly better range. This was a major escalation. It moved the fight in the quadrangle from one-on-one spit-and-run attacks to something more serious. For a few glorious days, I had the upper hand. I'd hold the shampoo bottle by my side and squirt an enemy combatant as I walked by. Or I'd poke my head around the corner of a building and wait until I could squirt someone, then quickly duck back away unseen. The other kids realized they could do the same thing. Next, some genius figured out that because the liquid we were squirting at each other was no longer carried in the mouth, it could be something other than water. There we were, filling up bottles with water and toothpaste and shampoo and squirting each other. I took part, lest I get left behind in the arms race. My preferred concoction was about 3 parts water with a little shampoo and a dollop of toothpaste. It was the perfect combination, not too thick, so it got plenty of distance when squeezed out of the bottle, but tainted enough that if it hit, it stuck, leaving a coconut-smelling sheen topped with a minty fresh zing. The conflict attracted a lot more attention now that it was no longer just the occasional kid with water down the back of his shirt. The teacher's security council gave a few kids detention, and we were all threatened with serious repercussions if the combat continued. Chemical warfare in the schoolyard was frowned upon. The game was over. One lunchtime, I'd retreated to the classroom to escape the conflict and finish some math homework I hadn't done the night before. A few minutes later, one of the other kids, Ben, came in too. "Hey, Toe-Nose," he said. "Get stuffed, Ben," I said. "Original," he said. "Original like your nose." "You only just worked out that my nose is like this?" "It's been obvious for a while," Ben said. "No joke," I said. "I don't know how you cope with a nose like that. It's all big and round and squishy." Really? I said. Take a look at your own nose any time recently. It's pretty huge. He did, in fact, have a rather large nose. Ben scoffed something under his breath and walked out of the classroom. It wasn't the end as far as I was concerned. Instead of finishing my homework, I grabbed an exercise book, ripped a page out, and set about drawing a portrait of Ben, in profile. It wasn't the most lifelike portrait, but I absolutely nailed one part of it, his nose. It took up half the page, emerging from his face like a massive mountain. I colored in his hair, drew on ears and lips, but the nose got special attention. It was giant, pendulous, overpowering. I drew gaping nostrils, then held my artistic creation up and smiled. It was beautiful, but it was missing something, something to give it scale, to put the size of the nose in context. I drew several spaceships entering and leaving his cavernous nostrils like they were docking at a spaceport. I titled it Spaceport Ben, and I slipped it into his desk. Proud of myself, I went to lunch and promptly forgot about it. As with such things, though, a day of reckoning was to come, and it reckoned soon enough. Later that week, I was called down to see Mr. Fuller, the deputy principal. Most of the school lived in vague, unspecified fear of Mr. Fuller. He was the perfect second in command. He delivered the bad news when needed and administered a strict, no-nonsense form of discipline that mainly worked by keeping students so in fear of the threat of getting in trouble that they behaved. I had no idea what I was being called down for. What Michael and Gary had told me about discipline at Iona started and stopped at the consequences of spitting, not what happened when you were called to the deputy principal's office. I sat waiting outside his office for a few minutes before I was called in. He sat behind a big desk, papers neatly piled on one side. On the wall he had shelves with books and sporting trophies. "Sit down, Robert." "Yes, sir." "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. I wondered if it was meant to be like a confession at church, and I was supposed to say, "Forgive me, Mr. Fuller, for I have misbehaved. It has been about 42 days since I last admitted to my bad behavior." Then I'd confess to talking in class, answering back to teachers, swearing, not doing my homework, and a range of other sins. I settled for a simple, "No, sir." "I understand you and Ben have been having some disagreements," he said. "That there's been some teasing going on." I relaxed. At least I wasn't getting in trouble, I thought. It was just the teasing incident number 8024 in a long line of teasing incidents. I knew there would be more. It hadn't had much impact. "Well, sir, it wasn't anything really. Nothing that got me very upset anyway." Settling scores in the deputy principal's office might seem like a good idea to some, but Dad had always taught me that it was better to face things head on. You might not always win, but getting someone else to fight your battles for you just encouraged more fights in the future. Unfortunately, I'd misunderstood what Mr. Fuller was saying. "It's fine that you didn't find it very upsetting, Robert, but that doesn't mean Ben didn't," he said. It took a moment to sink in. I wasn't the tease this time, apparently. I was the teaser. "Oh, okay." "Not really okay, Robert. No," he said. "I'd expect that you, more than most boys, would know how hurtful teasing can be." "Yes, sir." I started to go red. "Surely you know that it can be a very mean thing to pick on someone because of the way they look." "Yes, sir." "Was there a particular reason for what you did? What you drew?" I thought about that for a moment. "No, sir," I said. I made a note to never ever draw anything again, even if the spaceships going in and out of the nostrils did look cool and very funny. "Well, Ben has been down here twice in the last 2 weeks, very upset. Don't do it again." "Yes, sir." Mr. Fuller waved me out the door and sent me away with no further punishment than my shame in having missed my lunchtime. I was genuinely surprised to learn how much my drawing had upset Ben because I was teased so often myself, and I became better and better at dealing with it as I got older. Sometimes it wasn't just kids who were cruel, though. Sometimes it was adults, and somehow that was much worse. In grade 10, when we had to do a week of work experience to see what life was like in the adult world, I signed up to do work experience as a teacher. It was the default for a bunch of us. I don't know why I chose it. I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a teacher, but it seemed like a good choice as any. Come work experience week, another boy and I were shipped off to Catholic elementary school I'd never heard of. The week before, we'd all been given a lecture about taking the opportunity seriously and behaving appropriately. When we turned up to the school, we were neatly dressed and minding our manners. The 2 of us went to the administration block and waited outside the principal's office for what seemed like ages. Then she came out, introduced herself, and told us that I would be working with the grade 7 class and the other boy would be working with the grade 2 class. At Iona, relief teachers, student teachers, and work experience kids were all fair game for students to pick on. But the kids at this school were just fine. The kids in the classroom were smart and engaged, and the kids in the playground were well behaved. None of them said a thing about my funny face or my legs. I got the occasional stare from a student here or there, but nothing I wasn't used to. My biggest problem was the whole week was correcting the grade 7 students' spelling in class and trying to work out whether the proper spelling was potatoes or potatoes. Hint, it's potatoes with an E. The week sailed by and was capped off with a half-day Friday for us. I said goodbye to my grade 7 class and thanked the teacher who'd looked after me. Before I could go, though, I was sent to the principal's office. I thought maybe the other students and I were going to get a quick thank you, but he was nowhere to be seen. I waited outside the office for a few minutes before being called in. The school principal seemed nice enough. She was a well-spoken, middle-aged woman who seemed popular with the students. "It would have been appropriate," she said, without a hello, "if we were warned before you came." I had no idea what she was talking about. "Warned?" I asked. "Yes, warned," she said. She raised her voice slightly, like I was a kid in grade 2. "About you." "About me?" "When you arrived on Monday, we had to quickly swap the class you'd be in. You were supposed to work with the grade 2 teacher." I wondered for a second whether kids in grade 2 would be tested on how to spell the plural of potato. My next thought was that until we'd arrived, we were just names on a piece of paper anyway, so it couldn't have been that hard to change. Then it dawned on me what she meant. She was talking about the way I looked. I hadn't given any thought before I arrived to what the younger kids might think of me. I doubt my teachers at Iona had either. I did okay there. Surely I'd do okay at another school. What was there to worry about? I didn't know what to say. I started to cry. "I'm sorry," I said. "Good," she said, and got up to open the door for me. I cried all the way across the school over to where my dad was waiting to pick me up. I did my best to compose myself before I hopped in the car, but he knew something was going on and asked me what was wrong. I explained and then pleaded with him not to get out of the car and go give the principal a piece of his mind. "And don't tell Mom either, okay? I can handle it." He thought about it for a moment, then decided it was up to me. "Okay." It wasn't the last time I cried about the way I looked, but it was the last time, the very last time I apologized to anyone else for it.